why does almost everyone, regardless of their age, regardless of their relative success, secretly carry this heavy, nagging feeling that they are somehow falling behind in life?
Right. It's pervasive.
It really is. You could be 24, 32, maybe 45, and there's this invisible ticking clock in the back of your mind telling you that everyone else is running a race that you are somehow losing.
Exactly. And today, we are diving straight into the core of that exact question.
To get to the bottom of this, we are synthesizing a massive stack of research and clinical insight. We're pulling heavily from the Harvard-trained psychiatrist Dr. K, examining psychological frameworks like Leon Festinger's social comparison theory.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
And we're bringing in discussions on milestone anxiety from clinical podcasts like This Might Help and Head Straight.
We're also integrating raw human experiences from a really active self-improvement thread, because we want to ground the clinical data in reality, alongside mindset strategies from behavioral experts like Trish Blackwell and Trish Lee.
The goal of this deep dive is to completely deconstruct the psychological mechanisms, the cognitive biases, and the really intense societal pressures that create this persistent illusion of being late.
Right. We're going to map out exactly how modern media amplifies these unrealistic timelines.
Yeah.
How your own cognitive biases completely distort your perception of other people's success. And ultimately,
And this is the most important part.
ultimately equip you with practical strategies to redefine your progress and detach from these toxic, culturally conditioned timelines.
So whether you are, say, 24 and feeling completely stagnant while you watch your peers seemingly conquer the world, or you are 40 and experiencing a midlife pivot that has you questioning your entire trajectory.
This exploration is customized to help you understand your own mind and escape the trap of that invisible checklist.
Let's start by looking at the actual anatomy of this feeling, because it is so pervasive that it has a colloquial name: the quarter-life crisis.
Yeah, the quarter-life crisis.
Yeah. And while it might sound like a trendy buzzword, the data suggests it is a massive structural issue.
It is entirely structural. I mean, it isn't an official clinical diagnosis in the DSM-5, but researchers and mental health professionals universally recognize it as a profound developmental challenge.
It's everywhere.
Right. The current research indicates that it hits up to 70% of people in their 20s and 30s.
70%.
Yeah, 70. It typically lasts for about a year, occurring during these transitional periods of instability, often right at the tail end of emerging adulthood.
And when 70% of a demographic is experiencing the exact same internal crisis, we are no longer looking at individual psychological failings.
No, not at all.
We are looking at a systemic environmental trigger.
That number really reframes the entire experience. If you are sitting in a coffee shop right now looking around at your peers, the vast majority of them are secretly having an internal panic attack about their life's direction.
It's kind of wild to think about it that way. Everyone is sitting there sipping lattes, completely freaking out internally.
Exactly. This Might Help podcast gets into the specifics of this by focusing on what they call milestone anxiety.
Milestone anxiety.
Right. This is the dread associated with not hitting traditional life markers. You know, marriage, homeownership, specific career titles,
Yeah.
and hitting them at very rigid, culturally predetermined ages.
It's the pressure that if you don't have the mortgage by 30, you have somehow failed the assignment.
And to understand how visceral that pressure is, we really have to look at the raw documentation of it. There is a specific post from a 24-year-old woman in that self-improvement community that serves as a perfect, albeit really painful, case study.
Yeah, I read that one. It's heavy.
It is. She details a life of feeling entirely stagnant. She is working a low-paying job, living in a toxic environment with her parents, and simultaneously watching everyone in her peer group get engaged, land high-paying corporate positions, move to new cities, and travel.
And she articulates this profound fear that she has already wasted half her life at 24.
Right. The phrasing she uses is devastating.
She legitimately feels her window for success has closed before her prefrontal cortex has even fully developed.
But I want to dig into the response to that post because I think that is where the real insight lives. The top comment, the one that resonated with thousands of people, wasn't offering, empty platitude.
Oh, it wasn't a hang in there kind of comment.
Not at all. The commenter just dropped a massive reality check. They said, here's a fun fact.
Yeah.
Everyone feels behind in life.
Everyone.
Yeah, they pointed out the sheer mathematical certainty that there is literally always someone richer, better looking, or more successful.
And another commenter brought in a Carl Jung quote that completely reorients the timeline. The quote was, "Life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research."
I love that quote. That Jung quote is critical because it directly challenges the invisible checklist concept that Trish Lee discusses in her clinical work.
The invisible checklist.
Yeah, right. From early childhood, society hands us a highly specific script. Graduate high school at 18, finish college by 22, secure the foundational career by 25, marry by 28, buy the house, and have the first child by 30.
It's relentless.
And we internalize this timeline so deeply that it bypasses our conscious critical thinking. Any deviation from that highly specific, highly artificial timeline doesn't register to our brains as a mere change in plans. It registers as a fundamental, shameful personal failure.
We take natural variations in human development, the fact that some people find their passion at 20 and others at 50, and we pathologize them. We treat them as character flaws.
We do.
But I want to push back on the idea that this anxiety is purely a negative, destructive force. Trish Lee points out something quite counterintuitive about this heavy pressure in your chest.
Oh, right. She argues that this tight, anxious feeling of being behind only exists because you actively want a meaningful life.
That is such a crucial reframing.
It really is.
Yeah.
The anxiety is actually a misdirected signal of ambition. If you genuinely did not care about your trajectory, your growth, or your purpose, you wouldn't feel the sting of being behind.
You just be indifferent.
Exactly. The pain is evidence of your desire for self-actualization. The problem isn't that you are broken or uniquely flawed. The problem is that your healthy ambition has been weaponized against you by an invisible checklist that is fundamentally out of sync with reality.
But if the checklist is so culturally ingrained, why does it feel so uniquely suffocating right now? I mean, every generation has had expectations. Why does this specific iteration of milestone anxiety feel so paralyzing for people currently in their 20s, 30s, and 40s?
To answer that, we have to pull back from the psychology and look at the actual math. We have to look at the societal and economic shifts that have effectively pulled the rug out from under the timeline itself.
This is where Dr. K's analysis is vital.
Yes, he points out stark reality. The rules of the previous generation simply no longer apply, but we are still using their scorecard.
Which makes no sense.
Right. The foundational targets haven't really changed. People generally still desire the stability of a home, a committed partnership, or a reliable career. But those targets have become economically unmeetable for a vast, unprecedented portion of the population.
The structural foundation that supported the invisible checklist has just collapsed.
Let's talk about the math on that, because Dr. K uses a perfect example regarding higher education. He mentions that his entire undergraduate degree cost roughly what a single year, or in some cases a single semester, costs today at a comparable institution.
It's staggering.
You cannot expect a 24-year-old today to hit the exact same financial milestones as a 24-year-old in 1995 when the debt-to-income ratio has completely decoupled from reality.
And the statistics Dr. K cites are sobering. 50% of adults under the age of 30 still live with their parents.
50%.
When half of a demographic is unable to achieve basic physical independence due to soaring housing costs and inflation, that is a macroeconomic failure, not a micro-personal failure.
Exactly. Yet the individual internalizes it as personal shame.
I want to linger on how that macroeconomic failure bleeds into the deeply personal aspects of life, because Dr. K brings up the dating and mating crisis, and I think this is where the real silent suffering happens.
Oh, absolutely.
It is incredibly difficult to cultivate the confidence, the independence, and the self-assuredness required to navigate the dating market when your reality involves bringing a potential partner back to your childhood bedroom.
It really is. The economic barrier doesn't just keep you out of the housing market. It directly stunts identity formation and your ability to hit traditional romantic milestones.
It creates a severe cognitive dissonance. You are a biological adult with adult desires and adult capabilities, but you are physically trapped in the environment of your adolescence.
We are judging our self-worth using 1990s economic milestones while trying to survive a 2020s economic reality.
And Dr. K uses a sharp analogy to explain why this dissonance exists. He looks at how institutions process change.
Right. Psychiatry, for example, as a medical field, takes 20 to 30 years to fully integrate new understandings. We are only just now seeing comprehensive, long-term studies published on the psychological effects of early social media platforms that launched 2 decades ago.
The culture simply cannot update its scripts fast enough to match the speed of economic and technological change. We are evaluating our modern lives using entirely outdated software.
That's a great way to put it, outdated software.
But let's take this a step further. How does this structural mismatch affect our actual behavior? Dr. K suggests this creates a massive crisis of identity, particularly around traditional concepts of masculinity and femininity.
Yes, the societal expectations regarding traditional gender roles often remain incredibly rigid. There is still an immense unspoken pressure on men, for example, to serve as primary financial providers to be deemed marriageable in certain cultural scripts.
Even though the math doesn't support it.
Exactly. The economic leverage required to easily fulfill that role on a single income has basically vanished for the average earner. When individuals are crushed by the weight of these unmeetable, culturally enforced expectations, the psychological response is often retreat.
They just pull back.
They retreat into emotional suppression. They retreat into digital landscapes where the rules are clearer. This withdrawal fuels the current epidemic of loneliness. People isolate because they are convinced they are failing the checklist, completely unaware that the checklist itself is mathematically broken.
I hear what Dr. K is saying about the unmeetable targets, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Even if you completely understand the macroeconomic data, even if you intellectually know that 50% of your peers are also living at home, why doesn't that stop the pain? When you log on to Instagram, it doesn't look like everyone is struggling. It feels like everyone else figured out a cheat code to the economy that you somehow missed.
Right.
The logic just doesn't override the visceral reaction.
And that tension is exactly why the psychological trap is so difficult to escape. Intellectual understanding rarely overrides biological imperative.
Right.
And to understand why your brain ignores the macroeconomic data in favor of the curated feed, we have to examine Leon Festinger's social comparison theory, which was formulated back in 1954.
1954, so way before social media.
Way before. Festinger identified that human beings do not evaluate their worth, their abilities, or their social standing in a vacuum. We have an innate evolutionary drive to evaluate ourselves relative to our peers. We are biologically wired to figure out where we stand in the pecking order.
It's a survival mechanism. If you didn't know your place in the ancient tribe, you risk stepping out of line and getting ostracized.
Exactly. But Festinger outlined a specific mechanism that destroys us today: upward comparison.
Upward comparison.
This is the act of specifically comparing yourself to individuals you perceive as superior. People who have more money, better relationships, higher status. Engaging in chronic upward comparison triggers what is known as social comparison bias.
And the literature explicitly links this bias to rising levels of resentment, envy, chronic anxiety, and clinical depression.
We have to view this through the lens of self-determination theory, which outlines our three basic psychological needs: competence, autonomy, and relatedness.
Okay, let's break those down.
Sure. When you engage in chronic upward comparison, you attack all three pillars simultaneously. You feel incompetent because you aren't achieving what they are. You feel a loss of autonomy because the timeline seems dictated by external forces. And your sense of relatedness fractures because you view your peers as competitors rather than a supportive community.
This is the true psychological architecture of FOMO. It isn't just about missing a party. It's a blaring alarm bell signaling a deficit in your core psychological needs.
The Head Straight podcast has a really fascinating breakdown of how modern media takes this ancient tribal survival tool and completely weaponizes it.
Right, because in our evolutionary past, your comparison pool was incredibly small. You compared yourself to the 50 or 100 people in your immediate vicinity.
You might not have been the best hunter, but maybe you were the third best, and that was enough to secure your standing.
But today, your comparison pool isn't your village. Your comparison pool is the entire unfiltered internet.
You are subjecting your ancient nervous system to the curated highlights of 8 billion people. You are comparing your daily reality to prodigies, billionaires, and highly edited influencers.
Which introduces the concept of relative deprivation.
Yes.
You do not feel poor or unsuccessful or physically inadequate based on an objective baseline. You only feel deprived relative to the specific inputs you are consuming.
The Head Straight podcast uses the shop window analogy to explain this. Social media operates as a global shop window. People do not put their inventory in the window. They put their absolute best, most polished, filtered, and highly constructed items on display.
Trish Lee puts it perfectly when she says we are constantly comparing our messy, chaotic behind-the-scenes footage to everyone else's best day ever highlight reel.
It's so true.
You are sitting on your couch, dealing with the mundane reality of paying bills or fighting a cold, and your brain is actively comparing that state to a meticulously staged, highly filtered photograph of someone's vacation in Bali.
It is an entirely asymmetrical comparison, but your primitive brain processes the visual input as absolute reality.
And the clinical data on the consequences of this asymmetrical comparison is pretty alarming.
It is. The research on media's impact on body image and self-esteem demonstrates how continuous exposure to these idealized, entirely fabricated standards triggers massive spikes in severe mental health crises.
Society feels constantly intensely criticized for failing to meet a standard that does not even exist in the physical world.
And the platforms are algorithmically engineered to exploit this vulnerability. They are designed to keep the user in a state of mild, persistent dissatisfaction, because a dissatisfied user keeps scrolling, searching for resolution.
The algorithm actively moves the finish line. That is the most insidious part.
Right.
The Head Straight podcast makes this point. Let's say you actually hit one of those unmeetable targets. You save up for 5 years, you finally buy a modest home, or you get that promotion. You experience genuine satisfaction for a moment.
For a brief moment.
Exactly. But the second you open your feed, the algorithm, tracking your new demographic data, immediately serves you content of someone your age who just bought a much larger home, or a second property, or a private jet.
You cannot win the game of upward social comparison, because the internet possesses an infinite supply of people who are mathematically doing better than you.
This is why attempting to solve the feeling of being behind but simply achieving more is a fundamentally flawed strategy. If the target constantly moves, external achievement will never satiate the internal anxiety.
It just won't work. This requires us to pivot our analysis away from the screens and look inward. The screen is merely the trigger. The actual suffering is generated by the cognitive mechanisms within our own minds.
We need to examine how the ego, identity, and specific neural networks process this information.
This brings us to a concept from Dr. K that I find incredibly difficult to actually implement, but it's crucial. He makes a hard distinction between identity and identification.
It sounds like semantics, but it's actually the root of the entire crisis. How does he differentiate the two?
It is a profound shift in perspective. Identification is an outward-facing process. It is the act of taking external labels, external roles, and attaching them to yourself to signal your value to the tribe.
Like saying, I am a senior manager, I am an entrepreneur, I am a homeowner.
Exactly. You are defining your worth by your utility and your social rank. True identity, conversely, is entirely inward-facing. It asks the uncomfortable question: when all external labels, job titles, and relationship statuses are stripped away, who are you? What are your core values in a vacuum?
But I have to push back on Dr. K here. It is so easy for a psychiatrist or a philosopher to say, don't identify with your job title, don't identify with your external success. But when you spend 40, 50, or 60 hours a week executing that role to survive, and society exclusively rewards you based on that role, how does anyone actually separate their internal identity from their daily identification? It feels like asking someone not to think about the water they are swimming in.
That difficulty is exactly why the quarter-life crisis is so prevalent. People entering their late 20s and 30s are often hyper-fixated on identification because they are desperately trying to secure their economic survival and social standing.
They panic because they feel they are failing to acquire the correct external labels.
But the crisis occurs because they have completely neglected the cultivation of their internal identity. They're flawlessly executing a role, but they have no idea who the actor is.
Oh, wow.
And when the external labels are threatened by a layoff, a breakup, or simply looking at a more successful peer on social media, their entire sense of self collapses because the self was built entirely on borrowed external materials.
They are playing a character, and the character is falling behind in the script. This brings us to the actual neurology of why this feels so agonizing. Dr. K dives into the default mode network, the DMN.
Yeah, DMN, yeah.
For those familiar with neuroscience, you know the DMN is the network in your brain that activates when you are not focused on a specific external task. It is the center of self-referential thought. It is the literal voice in your head thinking about you, your past, and your future.
And the crucial clinical insight regarding the DMN is its behavior in states of depression and chronic anxiety. In these states, the default mode network becomes severely hyperactive, It essentially gets stuck in a loop of negative self-referential rumination.
It continuously generates the thoughts. I am a loser. I am falling behind. I've wasted my potential. I will never catch up.
It is a biological mechanism misfiring, creating a constant, punishing internal monologue.
To understand how the DMN tortures us with these thoughts, Dr. K and Jay Shetty discuss the Buddhist concept of the second arrow. And this perfectly maps onto our modern anxiety.
It really does.
The concept is that life will inevitably shoot you with a first arrow. This is the objective external event. You lose your job, your relationship ends, your rent goes up. There is undeniable natural pain associated with the first arrow.
But the true lingering suffering comes from the second arrow.
Right.
The second arrow is entirely self-inflicted. It is the narrative, the meaning, and the sweeping implications that your ego and your hyperactive DMN attach to the objective event.
The first arrow is, I lost my job.
And the second arrow is, I lost my job, therefore I am fundamentally incompetent, I will never recover, and I am permanently behind my peers. You're taking a localized event and extrapolating it into a permanent identity crisis.
But Dr. K points out something that completely shifts how we view achievement. He notes that people get totally stuck because the second arrow doesn't just apply to negative events.
That's right.
Our ego applies the second arrow to positive emotions and achievements as well. You get a massive promotion. That's the first arrow. The second arrow your ego fires is, I got a promotion, therefore I am superior. I have finally proven my worth. I am safe.
Exactly. And because we attach our fundamental worth to these external achievements, we become deeply addicted to the act of doing. We are desperately trying to use external events, promotions, purchases, milestones to manipulate our internal state and quiet the relentless negativity of the DMN.
We completely lose the capacity to simply be.
We require a constant drip feed of external validation to prevent the DMN from turning against us.
We are so terrified of what the DMN will say to us in the quiet moments that we go to absurd lengths to avoid ourselves. Dr. K shares a statistic that is both hilarious and incredibly dark.
Oh, the hemorrhoid statistic.
Yes, he notes that people are so desperate to avoid the painful, looping thoughts generated by the DMN that they constantly numb themselves with digital distraction, even during the most mundane biological functions.
Right.
This constant avoidance has contributed to a documented 65% increase in hemorrhoids, simply because people are sitting on the toilet for prolonged periods, endlessly scrolling through social media, solely to avoid 5 minutes of being alone with their own unmedicated thoughts.
It is a profound symptom of a larger pathology. We are literally damaging our physical bodies to avoid confronting our psychological state.
And the tragic irony is that the tool we use to numb the DMN social media is the exact tool that provides the DMN with the comparative data it uses to torture us later.
It is a perfect self-sustaining loop of anxiety. And as Krishley observes, when you are in that scrolling loop, the entity you are comparing yourself to often isn't even a real person.
This is one of the most striking insights from her work. She points out that the person you are so deeply envious of, the person you feel so desperately behind, is frequently an idealized, flawless future version of you that doesn't actually exist.
Right. Your DMN creates a fantasy projection of a future self who has no anxiety, no financial stress, no flaws, and then actively punishes your messy present self for failing to be that ghost.
Right.
You are losing a race against a hallucination.
This relentless internal friction leads Dr. K to speculate on the concept of spiritual evolution.
This is a really deep point.
It is. He posits that human beings, particularly in developed nations, have successfully shaped our physical environment to a point where immediate physical survival is relatively assured. We have climate-controlled environments, abundant food supplies, advanced medicine.
The acute evolutionary friction that historically drove human adaptation-surviving predators securing basic shelter has largely been mitigated. Therefore, the environment is now forcing an internal, psychological, and spiritual evolution.
That reframes the entire quarter-life crisis. It isn't a glitch. It's a forced evolutionary pressure. Because we don't have to fight for physical survival, the brain turns its evolutionary machinery inward.
The intense crisis of feeling lost, the anxiety of feeling behind, the depression of not measuring up. Dr. K is suggesting these are symptoms of us actively resisting this necessary internal growth.
We are trying to solve profound spiritual and psychological problems with external material achievements. We are trying to buy our way out of an existential crisis.
But once you understand the architecture of this trap, once you recognize that the economic timeline is broken, that social media algorithms distort reality, that your ego is firing second arrows, and that your default mode network is looping false narratives, the question becomes, how do you dismantle it?
How do you practically rewire your daily life and stop the cycle of feeling perpetually behind?
This requires synthesizing the actionable strategies from behavioral experts like Trish Blackwell, Dr. K, Trish Lee, and the clinical frameworks we've discussed. We need to move from analysis to application.
Let's dedicate serious time to these strategies because understanding the problem isn't enough to fix it. The first foundational rule to internalize, as articulated by Trish Blackwell, sounds incredibly simple, but it is incredibly difficult to execute in the moment.
She says, feeling behind is a feeling, not a fact.
A feeling, not a fact.
The distinction between feeling and fact is the cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy. Just because your default mode network generates a powerful visceral emotion of inadequacy or panic does not mean that emotion reflects objective reality.
You must train yourself to observe the feeling without endorsing it as truth.
When the panic hits, you have to mentally step back and say, I am experiencing the feeling of being behind rather than I am behind. It creates a wedge of consciousness between the stimulus and your reaction.
That wedge is where you get your agency back.
Exactly.
The second foundational rule comes from Dr. K, and it deals with how we actually attempt to change our lives when we feel stuck. He introduces the concept of ambivalence. When we want to hit a milestone, say changing careers or getting physically fit, we typically focus 100% of our mental energy on the benefit. We obsess over the dream job, the higher salary, or the perfect physique.
But the moment we actually start doing the work, we smash into the immediate painful cost of change. The rejection emails, the grueling study hours, the physical exhaustion.
And because our expectation was entirely calibrated to the benefit, the unexpected cost shocks the system, and we quit. We interpret the difficulty as a sign that we are behind or incapable.
Dr. K argues that we need to invert this process entirely. We must stop chasing the benefit and consciously, intentionally accept the cost of change upfront.
So if your goal is to pivot to a new industry at 35, do not focus on the corner office.
Tell yourself, this transition is going to involve sending hundreds of resumes, facing repeated rejection, and feeling incompetent for a year, and I am actively choosing to pay that cost.
You balance your expectations so the friction doesn't derail you. But what about the day-to-day moments? How do we stop the acute, painful comparison trap when we are scrolling on our phones or talking to a successful friend? Trish Blackwell offers a highly specific habit shift for this, which she calls convert comparison into a compliment.
Let's analyze the neuroplasticity behind this strategy. When you feel that sudden, familiar sting of envy, perhaps a colleague gets the promotion you wanted or a friend buys a beautiful home, your immediate, conditioned instinct is bitterness, self-pity, or attempting to find flaws in their achievement to soothe your ego.
Blackwell suggests interrupting that automatic neural pathway by actively, forcefully complimenting them in your own mind.
You consciously tell yourself, they are thriving, they earned that, and I am genuinely happy for them.
It feels incredibly unnatural at first. It feels like you are lying to yourself, but why does it actually work over time?
It works because you are actively rewiring your subconscious perception of success. Envy operates on a scarcity mindset. It assumes life is a zero-sum game where someone else's success directly diminishes your potential.
By forcing the compliment, you train your brain to view success as an abundant resource.
You stop viewing your peers as a threat to your survival. Over time, the positive energy you project outward dismantles the resentment within your own default mode network. You stop viewing yourself as a loser in a rigged game and start viewing yourself as a participant in a shared human experience.
It's essentially hacking your own jealousy to build your own self-worth.
Exactly.
Another deeply powerful strategy for reframing progress comes from Trish Lee. She talks about the vital importance of naming your season.
Naming your season. I like that phrasing.
So often we feel behind because we think we aren't actively producing measurable external results. But Lee points out that a human life is not a constant linear upward trajectory of production.
She emphasizes that periods of profound grief, periods of isolation, periods of deep internal reflection, or periods where you have to completely dismantle and rebuild your life from scratch, these are not unproductive times, even if they yield no external milestones.
She defines them as a season of becoming.
You must recognize the biological reality that roots grow in the dark. If you are in a season of internal healing or recalibration, you are not falling behind the person who is currently in a season of external harvesting. You are simply engaged in the invisible foundational work required for your next phase.
Naming the season removes the shame of not producing. It gives you permission to be in winter when everyone else on your timeline seems to be in spring.
Beautifully said.
But to actually endure those difficult seasons, we need tools to quiet the mind. To assist with that internal work, Dr. K recommends specific mental practices, the most prominent being the shunya meditation.
Shunya.
Shunya translates from Sanskrit to void or emptiness. And this isn't about manifesting success or visualizing your goals, it's the exact opposite.
The objective of Shunya meditation is to cultivate an experience of complete internal stillness and absolute nothingness.
Yeah.
You are not trying to solve your problems. You are attempting to temporarily suspend the mechanism that creates them.
The clinical benefit of this practice is profound. It directly, measurably deactivates the hyperactive default mode network.
When you sit in silence and focus entirely on the void, the brain initially rebels. It will scream for dopamine. It will throw your anxieties at you. It will remind you of every email you haven't answered.
That is the crucial part to understand. When you first try to sit in emptiness, it is agonizing. Your brain, accustomed to constant stimulation and constant anxiety about the checklist, views the silence as a threat.
Right.
But if you sit through the initial discomfort, what actually happens neurologically?
By refusing to engage with the thoughts generated by the DMN, by simply observing them and returning to the void, you slowly starve the network of the attention it requires to loop.
You disrupt the endless cycle of your ego obsessing over perceived failures and social standing.
You create a psychological sanctuary where you are simply being entirely free from the relentless demands of identification and external achievement. It is a daily reset for a highly stressed nervous system.
And to ground yourself in the physical reality after that reset, Trish Blackwell offers a powerful grounding mantra to use the moment the panic of being behind tries to creep back in.
She advises repeating this simple phrase, "This is where I am supposed to be, and wherever I go tomorrow is where I will be then."
The utility of that mantra is that it forcefully yanks your consciousness out of the anxiety of the fantasy future and the regret of the unchangeable past, anchoring you firmly in the present moment.
It is an assertion of radical acceptance. And this mindset perfectly aligns with a cultural counter-movement highlighted in the literature, JOMO.
JOMO. We are all intimately familiar with FOMO, but JOMO is the joy of missing out.
JOMO is the healthy, conscious antidote to the hyper-connected, hyper-comparative state. It is the active practice of finding deep satisfaction and contentment in your own current immediate reality, entirely unbothered by what the rest of the 8 billion person tribe is doing on their curated feeds.
It is turning off the phone on a Friday night, reading a book, and feeling absolutely no anxiety that you aren't at a networking event or a party.
Building on that internal satisfaction, Dr. K provides a highly practical, granular tool for rebuilding a sense of forward momentum and internal confidence when you feel completely stuck.
Right.
He advises the practice of stretching your capacity slightly every single day. The specific content of the action is largely irrelevant to the psychological outcome.
Explain how that works. If the content doesn't matter, what are we actually doing?
You are rebuilding the neural pathways of self-efficacy. If you normally swim 10 laps, you swim 11. If you normally read 5 pages before bed, you read 6. If you set your alarm for 7 a.m., you set it for 6:59 a.m.
The goal is not massive, overnight transformation.
The goal is the psychological act of proving to your own nervous system that you are capable of slightly more than you previously believed.
This consistent, microscopic stretching builds a deep, unshakable reservoir of internal trust and resilience that is completely independent of external validation or societal milestones. You stop relying on the checklist to tell you you are capable because you prove it to yourself daily.
It's about showing up for yourself in ways so small that they bypass the ego's resistance.
And as we synthesize all these strategies, the radical acceptance, the deactivation of the DMN, the microscopic daily progress, it leads to a truly counterintuitive, paradigm-shifting idea from Dr. K.
Yes.
He suggests that when we are in the depths of this crisis, sometimes the absolute worst advice you can give someone is just be yourself.
That sounds controversial, but his reasoning gets to the core of identity. What he means is that the version of you that you are desperately clinging to, the version that feels so far behind, the version that is consumed by anxiety, is often not your true self at all.
It is merely a collection of unhealed trauma, rigid social conditioning, internalized checklists, and fragile ego defenses.
When you fiercely defend the need to be yourself, You are often just defending your limitations and your conditioned anxieties.
Letting go of the desperate need to defend that fabricated, culturally programmed identity is the ultimate freedom. It allows you to dismantle the ego that is firing those second arrows.
You stop trying to protect the character you've been playing and actually begin the process of becoming the most authentic, resilient human you could be.
Exactly. As we pull all these disparate threads together, the economic data, the neuroscience, the clinical frameworks, what does this actually mean for you, the listener, navigating your life tomorrow morning?
It means recognizing the invisible architecture of the trap you have been caught in. You must continually remind yourself that you are not failing a race. You have simply exhausted yourself running on someone else's fabricated track.
The milestones you are judging your fundamental worth against are largely artifacts of a bygone era, economically unmeetable for most and structurally flawed.
The social media feeds that spike your heart rate and make you feel deeply inadequate are nothing more than highly curated shop windows, algorithmically designed to trigger ancient tribal survival anxieties to keep your attention.
And that heavy, persistent, suffocating feeling of being behind is largely just your default mode network glitching out, looping a false comparative narrative generated by an insecure ego. It is a feeling, it is not a fact.
We want to directly challenge you to claim your agency this week. Look analytically at the specific areas of your life where you feel the most intense pressure, the deepest shame, or the most paralyzing inadequacy, and ask yourself the clarifying questions posed by the Head Straight podcast.
Behind compared to who? Behind compared to what?
Scrutinize the actual standard you are measuring yourself against. Deconstruct the invisible checklist. Remember the fundamental truth that forward is a pace.
It does not matter how fast you are moving relative to the curated highlights of others. Forward is the only metric that matters.
It really is.
And as we close this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We have spent this entire time dissecting how painful and disorienting this quarter-life crisis, this milestone anxiety, truly is.
Yes, we have.
But what if we flip the perspective entirely? What if the profound, aching discomfort of feeling behind isn't a symptom of your failure at society's game?
What if, instead, it is the exact evolutionary friction required to force you to stop playing society's game altogether?
What if feeling completely lost, stagnant, and disconnected from the invisible checklist is the necessary, painful prerequisite for finally being forced to look inward?
Meaning, this exact crisis, this precise moment of feeling hopelessly behind, is actually the exact moment your true self-defined life finally begins.